Our project is on the children of Topaz. The members of our group are Porter Cragen, Rolando Goulart, Cherston Iselson, Kenzie Molyneux, and Caleb Peterson. We wanted to start out by defining what is Topaz. And Topaz is a Japanese internment camp. An internment camp, according to dictionary.com, is a prison camp for the confinement of prisoners of war, enemy aliens, political prisoners, etc. The enemy aliens in this case are the Japanese Americans in America in World War II. The Executive Order 9066 was given by Franklin D. Roosevelt, and this was the order that made all Japanese Americans come to different internment camps around the U.S. This was in reaction to the Pearl Harbor bombing, and it was centered around fears of Japanese American relationships with the enemy. The Topaz internment camp was opened on September 11th, 1942, and closed on October 31st, 1945, so it was open for about 3 years. Some different facts about Topaz are that it was located 16 miles northwest of Delta, Utah, so it was very close to us, just in central Utah, a couple hours away, and that just makes it more real to us and applicable that this happened so close to us. It also cost about $4 million, was 640 acres large, and 11,000 people were cycled through the camp. The most people that were there at one time was about 8,000. Security-wise, there was a high wired fence surrounding the perimeter, and armed guards were always on duty. This just shows that it was run security-wise much like a prison. Why would our group choose the children of Topaz? And the reason that we did this was because the children are so easily influenced. They're in the very earliest stages of their life. They're so innocent, and they represent the future generations. These children will grow up being influenced by the ideas and the experiences that they had in this camp, and they will teach that to their children and their children's children. They are future generations. Some interesting questions that my group had were, what lasting effects did the internment camp have on the children there? What was the daily routine of the children? And did the children understand why they were put in an internment camp? For the food and culture, it was a culture shock for mostly adults, but only some children, because the children were less rooted in their Japanese culture and ways. For a lot of adults, though, it was definitely a culture shock because everything in the internment camp was meant to be Americanized. The food was meant to be very American food. There was salami, different cold foods, and as Japanese Americans, they were used to vegetables, fish, and rice, and that was their food that they had normally eaten. To become Americanized was highly promoted by the government in the internment camps. There were classes on Americanization, and they were also encouraged to manufacture for the war effort, very encouraged to do that, and to join different American organizations for the children. The children were encouraged to join FFA, the American Red Cross, the children's version, different things like that to kind of throw them into the American culture. They were also able to maintain some of their Japanese culture, though. They were able to have sumo tournaments sometimes. They celebrated the autumn harvest dance, Bon Odori, and a lot of people who were a part of the internment camps said that maintaining this part of the culture helped maintain their morale and sanity so that their life wasn't completely and absolutely turned over. They still had a little bit to hang on to. The school life at Topaz was tried to make as normal as possible. Topaz was run as a city. There were schools, newspapers, sports, and talent shows, and anything else you can imagine that would be in a city was attempted to have in Topaz as well. And especially the teachers and adults just tried to make school as normal as possible for the children so that they could have some routine and some stability. They were able to have learning. They learned through mathematics and reading, just like regular children would. They were also able to have different activities, like plays and operas and sports. They had different class pets, just a lot of different things that you would have in a normal classroom. They also were able to have at Topaz. We get a lot of these details from the daily diary that was kept by a third grade class at Topaz. It gives deeper insight to what happened at Topaz, and also we can hear the children's voice through that and their personal ideas and feelings and interests. So our daily diary, which was kept by the third grade class, was kept from March to August 1943. The teacher that led this daily discussion that they contributed to was Mrs. Lillian Yamochi Hori. And she was the one who would transfer the discussion to the diary. So all the entries have the same handwriting because she was the one transferring it. The third grade class, though, had 27 students, and they were the ones who provided the details from their daily lives for the diary. And they also took turns drawing the pictures. Every single entry has pictures around it that have something to do with what they talked about in their entry, and the children took turns drawing that. There are different holidays and events that are recorded in our daily diary, such as the 4th of July and also Hana Matsuri, which is Buddha's birthday. The holidays are just a really big part of their lives, so they definitely recorded that. They also recorded their hard living conditions. The entries are said in a factual manner, but you can see through what's happening that there are definitely hard living conditions. There's a lot of disease, unreliable running water, and just a lot of unreliability in general. Things are always breaking, things are going wrong, there's disease, there's things catching on fire, a lot of hardships. They were also encouraged to demonstrate patriotism on a daily basis. They were supposed to purchase war bonds to save materials for the military, and also different internees also enlisted for military duty. You can see on these two journal entries some different details about their lives. On the bottom right, you can see the no running water problem for a couple of the blocks in the internment camp in the last paragraph there. They also mention that they are supposed to pay into war bonds and stamps and not kill spiders because they need to give them to Uncle Sam for the war. For different entertainment, they had sports teams. This was for a lot of the older children, that they had football and baseball and teams for that. A boy named Shorty even created a baseball diamond so they could have more variety. They were always looking for something new. Even the younger children were able to participate in sports because they would compete as classes against each other with baseball and some other things as well. Sometimes there were no activities available. The weather was so bad, and sometimes there just was nothing available. And if this was the case, a lot of the times they would make lists of things that they would like to do and try, the children would. And I think this just shows the hope that the children had that this would end and that they would have opportunities in the future. Some different hardships that they had at the internment camp was the climate. The climate was very extreme. When it was cold, it was really cold. And when it was warm, it was really warm. There was also definitely a sand problem because it's in central Utah, it's a desert, and there was sand everywhere, always. There was no getting away from it. And it did not help that the barracks were not well insulated and didn't provide really any good shelter from the elements, so the sand was just always everywhere. Um, the barracks were made so hastily that they were made out of green wood. This is from a person who was interviewed. He was a child at the Topaz internment camp, and he says it was made from green wood. So when green wood shrinks, there were giant gaps between each of the planks of wood in the barracks, and so it didn't really provide good shelter in any way. The cold could get in, the hot could get in, the sand could get in, and it just didn't really provide shelter. There were also no kitchens or bathrooms in the internment in the barracks as well. They just had community kitchens and mess halls and also community bathrooms. So that must have been a very hard thing for the children to almost always be uncomfortable. There was hardly getting away from the uncomfortable climate. The guards at Topaz internment camp were also very stern. They didn't really treat the internees like humans. There were multiple incidents where adults were shot and killed for being near the perimeter of the camp, near the fence. There was a 63-year-old man named James Hatsuki and also a couple walking near the fence. Those happened at different times, but it was the same situation. They were just walking near the fence, assumed that they were trying to escape, and shot and killed. This never happened to any children, but you can imagine the fear that would be put into the children's minds to see people they even know and probably trust be shot by these guards for just being near a fence. There was a lot of disease. This was another hardship that they faced. There was a lot of disease at the camp. There was typhoid fever, smallpox, flu, whooping cough, tuberculosis. They were just crammed conditions, so disease was very easily spread. Eventually, typhoid vaccinations were required, but there were still the other diseases. Mosquitoes also found their way into the camp during the warmer seasons. So there was also the Zika virus and the West Nile virus, which are vicious viruses. Now to the question of, did the children understand why they were in the internment camp? The answer is really no, not at the time. There were feelings of anxiousness and concern for sure. Also, some children thought that they were going to an actual camp where they would pitch tents and go fishing. But then when they got to the camp, they saw that internment camp was a very different thing. The government tried to influence the way they thought about the internment camp as well. In a 1943 film made by the US government, they said that going to the internment camp was a sacrifice that they, the Japanese Americans, could make on behalf of America's war effort. So it was seen as an act of patriotism almost. Samuel Mihara, who was 9 years old at the time of the camp, said that it was told that it was his duty that he should go to the camp, and it would show their allegiance to the United States. For a lot of the internees, understanding came much later. They didn't understand that their rights were being violated until years later, when it just kind of dawned on them, and they learned more about their country and their experiences, and they saw that how badly they were wronged. Some effects of Topaz. These are some facts from some interviews that were given of some children who were at Topaz, who are now adults, older adults. Masao Yamashita, who was 6 years old when he was at the camp, says that his family did not talk about the experience. He says they were ashamed and wanted to forget it. They had to completely start over after their experience at the internment camp and in an entirely new location. So to kind of ignore the experience, it almost festers the bad feelings and the bad experiences. And then to completely start over after that, he says it changed how he viewed himself entirely. Toro Saito, who is 4 years old when at the camp, says that his family split up because of the internment camp and the pressure that it put on his family, and this was not uncommon. It happened to a lot of families. He also says that, and this is a quote, that camp was easy compared to the afterlife, and this is because of the discrimination. He says that the discrimination was so bad that even as a young kid, he wished that he could wake up with blonde hair and blue eyes. He didn't want to be Japanese anymore. 15 previous internees were able to return to Topaz. This was another shows the effects. This was on April 22nd, 2017. It just shows it was an overwhelming and emotional and even traumatizing experience for a lot of them. A lot of them were even moved to tears to their own surprise. Also, another effect of Topaz was the apology that the United States government gave in 1988. $20,000 was given to each resident still living, but there really isn't a monetary reconciliation that you can give for the experiences that these people went through. In conclusion, the Japanese internment camp at Topaz was created and attempted to make a normal life for the children. They had a relatively normal day-to-day life, and they had kind of normal childhood experiences, but it is tainted by an overall just influence of bad feelings and what the government was trying to do to them, and just a violation of rights. Some common aftermath was trauma, absence of patriotism. Even though the camp was meant to encourage patriotism, it definitely discouraged it within the children as they grew up later. It created an absolutely new life for everyone who was in the camp. They never returned to their pre-camp life, and in a lot of cases, it broke families because of the pressure. Overall, the camp is seen as one of the greatest violations of citizens' rights done out of fear, and it shows us what that fear can lead to dangerous outcomes. And the children at Topaz are innocent victims of these dangerous outcomes. So here's our works cited. We have 19 different sources. A lot of them are articles. Some of them are YouTube videos, interviews, pictures. There was also a book centered around the daily diary, and the daily diary itself was a very good source. But overall, it was a very interesting topic, and thank you so much for listening.